In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on February 28, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start. If you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Texas versus Texas A&M. Rivalry games like this one between Texas and Texas A&M feel less like a regular season stop and more like a family argument that has been waiting all year to happen. Everything is louder, every whistle feels personal, and every run by either team suddenly looks bigger than it is on paper. Texas comes in with that slightly desperate energy, living on the bubble and still replaying how the first meeting slipped away late. Texas A&M, on the other hand, has the more comfortable record on the surface, but a recent stretch that has quietly chipped away at that early season shine. Texas has leaned into what it does best, which is score in bunches and put real pressure on defenses over and over again. The offense spreads the floor, uses length on the perimeter, and forces you to pick your poison on each possession. It is not always pretty on the other end, and everyone knows that, but sometimes a team's identity is exactly that: heavy offense and just enough resistance when it truly matters. In a road setting like this, that kind of profile can actually be freeing because the mindset shifts from playing perfect basketball to simply throwing punch after punch and seeing who blinks first. Texas A&M has the home crowd, the familiarity with the rims, and the comfort of routine, waking up in their own beds and jogging through their own shoot-round. The Aggies have shown they can control stretches of games with physical play, extra possessions, and the rhythm that comes from a confident group that knows its spots. The problem is that recent results have chipped away at the aura of reliability. Games that once felt secure started to slide, leads melted quicker than they should have, and the margin for error shrank without anyone fully realizing it until the losses stacked up. The first meeting between these two already told a small story. Texas led, Texas A&M responded, and the gap on the final scoreboard was more of a nudge than a knockout. That kind of game plants a seed in both locker rooms. For the Aggies, it whispers that they can handle this matchup, but only if they lock in again. For the Longhorns, it keeps saying, quietly but constantly, that they were right there, and that 1 or 2 possessions swinging the other way completely changes how that night is remembered. Honestly, rivalry rematches with this kind of emotional and bracket weight often tighten the screws mentally. Coaches shorten rotations, veterans play a few more minutes than usual, and the underdog, if it has any real firepower, often plays with a looseness that the favorite just cannot quite match. The favorite feels the pressure of supposed to win, especially at home, and that pressure rarely helps shot selection or late-game decision-making. The underdog, meanwhile, can lean into chaos, into pace, into anything that keeps the gym restless and the bench energized. Here is the thing: Texas has the kind of offensive punch, revenge motivation from the first matchup, and nothing to lose mindset that fits perfectly with the idea of keeping this game tight from tip to final horn. Texas A&M has plenty going for it, but recent stumbles and the emotional weight of protecting home court in a rivalry spot can make those final possessions feel heavy. When one team has already shown it can hang for 40 minutes and now gets the luxury of playing the spoiler on the road, taking the points attached to that story feels far more appealing than trusting the wobbly favorite to win with margin. As our first pick for this matchup, the Texas Longhorns to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. 2 offenses that can get hot, a rivalry crowd that wants to roar, and late February tension that tends to push players into hero mode. On paper, that sounds like the perfect recipe for a wild shootout. But sometimes the ingredients suggest one thing while the actual dish that comes out of the oven is much more controlled. The first time these teams met, the build-up sounded like a track meet was coming, yet the final product was closer to a grind. Both sides had their moments, but long stretches turned into half-court possessions, drawn-out sets, and possessions where nobody wanted to be the one who made the huge mistake. Film study from that game gives both coaching staffs a clear sense of where the easy points came from and how to shut those doors. When teams see each other again, especially in the same season, that familiarity usually trims away some of the looseness and some of the easy transition chances. Free throws and physical play also matter a lot for how many points end up on the board. Both of these programs are comfortable getting to the line, playing through contact, and using strength to create advantages rather than just launching quick shots every trip. That style can inflate points sometimes, but it also drags games into a slower heartbeat with more whistles, more resets, and fewer wide-open runouts. Possessions start to feel like small negotiations, not races. Each trip down the floor becomes slightly more deliberate, which might not thrill neutral fans, but does tend to cap how wild the scoring can get. Honestly, big rivalry games with March looming just around the corner often tighten up rather than explode. Players feel every miss a little more. Coaches call one extra set. Everyone becomes just cautious enough that the score creeps instead of sprints. It can still look intense, but the intensity is more about body language and defense than about seeing both teams trade quick threes for 40 straight minutes. The current perception around these offenses suggests that points should come easy, and yes, they are both capable of putting up impressive totals on the right night. Here, though, the mix of scouting familiarity, physical half-court play, and whistle-driven pauses makes a slightly more modest scoring outcome feel more realistic. Not a slog, not some ugly rock fight, just a game that falls short of the wild numbers people might expect when they hear these two names. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. San Diego versus Portland. San Diego heads up to the Chiliz Center for a late February matchup with Portland, the kind of game that feels like a quiet little crossroads on the schedule but matters a lot to both locker rooms. San Diego sits at 11-19 overall with a 5-12 mark in league play. Portland sits at 12-18 with the same 5-12 in conference. So on paper, it looks like almost a mirror matchup with a small nod to the home floor. It is one of those afternoons where the building might not be packed to the rafters, but every fan in there knows this is a chance to feel a little better about how the regular season wraps up. The market has treated Portland as the slightly stronger side at home, not by a massive gap. More like a gentle push toward the Pilots because of the gym and the familiar rims. Games like this sometimes turn into auditions for bigger roles in the conference tournament, and guys know that, so the energy tends to spike even if the national spotlight is somewhere else. San Diego already handled Portland once this month, taking that first meeting by a score of 71-58, and that result sits in the back of everyone's mind like a stubborn replay. The way that game unfolded tells a big part of the story. San Diego caught absolute fire from deep, dropping 12 threes on 26 attempts, while Portland went just 2 for 19 from long range, which is the kind of split that makes any coach stare at the shot chart and sigh. That kind of shooting gap can make two fairly similar teams look worlds apart for one night, and honestly, that first matchup had more of that coin flip chaos feel than some clear "this team is just better" statement. Since then, San Diego has had to figure things out without Tyler Johnson, who was leading them with around 14.6 points and 4.3 assists per game before he left the program, and losing that main ball handler and creator has nudged more pressure onto everybody else in that backcourt. The Toreros have looked a bit more wobbly in late-game situations without him, especially when they have had to string together good possessions on the road after tough spots like that overtime loss at Oregon State, and that kind of emotional hangover can linger more than people admit. Portland, for its part, has already been living with its own bad news for a while. Several season-ending injuries, a thin rotation, even that unusual move of activating a former grad assistant just to stabilize the numbers in practice and in games, which sounds wild but also shows how settled they are into this new normal. The important part is that this patched-together version of Portland is the same one that erupted for 120 points against Willamette, drilled 13 threes in a win over Pacific, and pulled off that eye-opening home upset of Gonzaga, so the ceiling with this group in this building is very real. Home games have turned into Portland's emotional roller coaster, from blowout losses to those "how did they just do that" wins, and that volatility cuts both ways. But when you are laying a small number, you care more about whether that top gear exists than whether every minute looks pretty. Model-based predictors lean ever so slightly in Portland's direction in this matchup. basically framing it as a near toss-up with a gentle lean to the Pilots when you bake in home court, the current rotations, and San Diego's adjustment to life without its lead guard. Here is the thing, when one side has already shown in this very gym that it can hang big numbers on strong opponents with this exact short-handed roster, and the other is still patching together its late-season identity after losing its star creator, the path you trust more tends to be the one that comes with familiar rims and a louder bench. As our first pick for this matchup, the Portland Pilots to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Scoring-wise, these two look like they both walked out of the same defense-optional clinic, which is why this matchup has such a fun, slightly chaotic feel when you start thinking about how many points can pile up. San Diego averages in the mid-70s on offense and allows close to 80 points per night, while Portland lives in a similar neighborhood, scoring in the low to mid-70s and giving up just under 80, so the typical game for either team already lives in that high-scoring zone where every trip down the floor feels dangerous for the scoreboard operator. Analytic sites that track offensive and defensive efficiency show that opponents are scoring very efficiently against both teams, with effective field goal percentages north of the low 50s against Portland and creeping into the mid-50s against San Diego, which is a fancy way of saying shooters are comfortable and getting the looks they want. If you average out the points these teams score and allow across the season, you land in a combined range that sits a few buckets higher than where the projected number for this game is posted, so even a fairly ordinary performance from both sides tends to nudge totals up into that mid-150s territory. The game logs back that up with specific nights that feel almost like video game sessions. San Diego has been in track meets like that 96-92 thriller with Washington State, that 93-99 shootout with Gonzaga, and that 113-point outburst against Bethesda, while Portland has its own set of wild box scores with 120 points in one game, 87 in a loss to Pepperdine, and that 80-plus display against Gonzaga. None of that guarantees anything, of course, but it does paint a clear picture of how these teams tend to play over long stretches of a season. Open floor, early clock threes, a lot of attacking off the dribble, and not a lot of lockdown possessions that make opposing guards miserable. The one thing that looks like a contradiction is that first meeting, which ended on only 129 total points, and it might make you wonder if these two just drag each other into uglier games. But let me explain why that game does not really change the core outlook. San Diego had that hot shooting night from outside. Portland went 2 for 19 behind the arc, and yet even with that brutal showing from the Pilots, the game still managed to sit within shouting distance of this new projected number. If Portland even creeps up toward a normal shooting performance from 3 in the rematch, especially at home where role players usually feel more comfortable, the math shifts pretty quickly. San Diego is now without its top guard, which hurts their offense on one hand, but it can also push them into more simplified, faster decisions, and defensively it rarely helps to lose your best on-ball defender, so the floor can tilt toward more clean looks for Portland's guards. Portland's short rotation feeds into that story too, as legs get heavy early in the second half, defensive stances get a little looser, hands stop contesting as hard, and all of a sudden you have more fouls, more free throws, and more broken floor situations in the final 10 minutes. Late-game sequences in these kinds of matchups, with two teams chasing a feel-good result late in the regular season, can also add sneaky points through intentional fouling, quick 2-for-1 attempts, and bench guys trying to make an impression on film, and that tends to favor a number that drifts higher rather than lower. So while that earlier meeting finished well below what these teams often play to, the full season pattern, the current rotations, and the way both defenses allow efficient looks still lean toward a game where the scoreboard stays busy for most of the afternoon. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Baylor versus Central Florida. Baylor heading into Orlando has that feeling of a brand name walking into a building where the locals would love nothing more than to knock the logo off the chest. The line still treats these two as if they live in the same neighborhood, even though the season story has drifted in very different directions. Baylor sits in that strange space where the record looks pretty average, yet people still talk about them like a threat because the offense is smooth, efficient, and comfortable scoring in the 80s on any normal night. That kind of reputation sticks around, a bit like when a tech company drops a legendary product and everyone keeps giving them benefit of the doubt, even when the next few versions are buggy. UCF, on the other hand, has built a season that actually matches the way fans talk about statement wins. They have stacked real results, handled pressure spots, and walked into tough gyms and left with the kind of victories that show up in highlight packages and selection committee meetings. There is a different energy to a team that knows it is building something, especially at home, where the crowd feels every stop and every made three as if they are personally keeping the momentum alive. In a sport where campus arenas can feel like pressure cookers, Addition Financial Arena has turned into one of those places where ranked visitors do not exactly exhale. Honestly, the market still gives Baylor the kind of respect that belongs to last year's version, not the one grinding through a physically punishing schedule with a shorter bench and a defense that leaks more than their staff would like. That kind of thin depth chart matters in this conference, especially when you are being asked to go on the road and absorb another night of body blows, closeouts, and long possessions. UCF plays with a physical edge, shoots confidently from deep, and tends to grow into games as the minutes pile up, which is exactly the sort of profile that punishes a tired rotation. It is not that Baylor cannot have a hot shooting night. They clearly can. It is that over the course of 40 minutes, the little things stack up. Loose balls, extra possessions, fresher legs, and those are the details that usually decide who actually covers a small number in a hostile gym rather than just who looks good on paper. Travel also sneaks into this picture. Baylor has been knocked around by a brutal conference slate and dropping into Orlando to face an energized UCF group that just showcased what it can do on the road feels less like a soft landing and more like walking into a team that now believes it has the blueprint. You can almost feel the contrast, one side trying to steady the season, the other trying to stamp it with another signature result for the home crowd. That gap between perception and current reality is where this spread quietly tilts. As our first pick for this matchup, the UCF Knights to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. On paper, both offenses look like they want to run up the scoreboard, with averages that make you think of a fun, free-flowing game where everyone leaves happy and the scoreboard operator gets a workout. That is the first instinct, especially if you just scroll box scores and see plenty of nights where both teams are living in the 80s and beyond. It feels simple. High scores plus high scores should mean a high total getting threatened. Here is the thing, those averages are padded by earlier non-conference games that felt more like open gym than late-season Big 12 basketball. Once the schedule tightens and scouts know every set and every tendency, the game slows down in subtle ways. Possessions get a little longer, coaches value each trip more, and players understand that one empty stretch can swing a game, so shot selection tightens up. You still see the occasional explosive night, that one outing where UCF starts raining threes and the opponent cannot keep up. Yet those are the exceptions, not the rule. At home, UCF has quietly been part of plenty of games where the final combined score lands a bit lighter than what people expected going in. They defend with real effort, they rebound, and they are willing to play through the half court when the matchup calls for it. A few recent results show that rhythm, games that felt competitive and entertaining, but still slid under what the number suggested before tip. Then there is that wild road shooting show that ended up as a full-on track meet, which sticks in memory precisely because it was such an outlier. That is how our brains work. We remember fireworks more than we remember controlled wins. Baylor adds another layer. Their defensive issues can absolutely pull games into shootout territory. That part is true, but the thinner rotation and physical toll of the season can also nudge them toward more measured stretches, especially on the road. When legs get heavy, jumpers stop falling quite as often, transition chances shrink, and the game drifts into more half-court sets and fewer full-speed breaks. Coaches this late in the season are usually happy to win in a slightly lower scoring window if it means keeping control of tempo and protecting their key players from foul trouble and fatigue. So you get this tension, two offenses that can score, sitting inside a conference context that often drags totals down from what their season averages might suggest. Honestly, this number asks these teams to put together another perfect storm scoring night, and that is a lot to ask repeatedly. With conference familiarity, coaching adjustments, and the natural late-season squeeze on every possession, the more reasonable expectation is a game that still has runs, still has big shots, but lands shy of the most explosive version of their combined scoring history. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Washington State versus Pepperdine. Malibu in late February is usually for sunsets and questionable life choices, but this one is for basketball inside Firestone Fieldhouse. Firestone seats 3,104, so it plays less like an arena and more like a pressure cooker. Pepperdine has the place wrapped in senior day energy for grad students Javon Cooley and Preston Phillips. The whole setting has that this means something feel because the program is heading to the mountain at Mullen Park in the 2026-2027 season. Small gyms do a funny thing. They make normal runs feel like tidal waves. A couple of made shots can sound like a parade, even if it's only 2 possessions. That's great for emotion, but emotion doesn't guard anyone. Crowd noise can raise your heartbeat, but it can't fix blown rotations. The betting market is still pointing in one clear direction on the side. Washington State is the team carrying the Prove It label, while Pepperdine is carrying the Hold Up label. That difference matters on spread nights because process beats vibes more often than people want to admit. A clean offensive process is like good accounting. It's boring, but it keeps you alive. KenPom's efficiency view backs up the gap between these teams, and it's not subtle. Washington State grades out as the healthier overall profile, the kind that travels well and repeats. Pepperdine, meanwhile, has been stuck near the bottom defensively, and that's the one trait that ruins underdogs. A leaky defense forces you to play perfect on the other end, and perfect is not a strategy. ESPN's Team Snapshot tells the same story without needing a spreadsheet. Washington State tends to shoot the ball better, and it tends to create cleaner chances. Pepperdine has had trouble keeping teams out of rhythm, and that's how games get away from you. If you can't stack stops, you can't control the game's mood. And the first meeting already showed the shape of this matchup. Washington State kept Pepperdine moving side to side, kept possessions alive, and eventually built real separation. It didn't feel like a magic trick. It felt like repetition, the same stress over and over. That kind of steady pressure is rough on a defense that already leaks. Pepperdine can absolutely make a game feel chaotic. A quick burst can flip the building, and that's real. The problem is what comes next, because chaos only helps if you can cash it in with stops. Without stops, the burst becomes a highlight, not a plan. Washington State's recent form does add a wrinkle. The last 5 games read like 1-4, which is the kind of stretch that makes people hesitate. The 1-point loss at LMU on February 25th is a clean example because it's close enough to sting for days. Close losses can rattle you or they can sharpen you, and that's the fork in the road. This spot also isn't asking Washington State to reinvent itself. It's asking for grown-up possessions, good shots, solid decisions, and no silly giveaways. That's the kind of job that travels, even when confidence is wobbly. And yes, it's weirdly simple, but simple wins a lot of games. The availability notes are also straightforward, which helps keep the handicap honest. Washington State's Emmanuel Ugbo is listed out for the rest of the season due to suspension. Pepperdine's Danilo Dozic is listed questionable with an undisclosed issue. Beyond those notes, this matchup stays more about habits than surprises. Spread outcomes usually come down to who can play their game longer. Washington State's edge is a steadier workflow, better shot creation, and fewer possessions that feel like a coin toss. Pepperdine's problem is that it needs the game to be emotional and clean at the same time. That combo exists, but it's rare and it's hard to schedule on command. As our first pick for this matchup, the Washington State Cougars to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total angle starts with a simple truth. The last time these two met, the scoreboard got loud. That memory sticks because high-scoring games always do. The trap is assuming the sequel has to look the same because totals are fragile. One cold stretch can erase 10 minutes of good work. Tempo matters here, and the tempo profile isn't pure sprint. KenPom labels both teams more middle lane than fast lane, which shifts the burden onto efficiency. Efficiency is great when it shows up, and brutal when it disappears. Late February hoops has a way of turning clean looks into rushed looks, especially when legs get heavy. Washington State has had recent games where scoring felt like it came in clumps, not in a steady stream. That's not a moral judgment, it's just how variance looks when you watch it live. You can see the ball stick for a minute, then you can see it pop again. Those quiet patches matter a lot when a total is set for offense. Pepperdine has flashed the kind of pop that makes an over feel comfortable. Pepperdine has also had nights where the offense goes flat against real resistance. That swing, hot one night and cold the next, is the whole story for totals handicapping. Consistency is what overs buy, and inconsistency is what undersell. Situationally, the regular season finale angle can push things in opposite directions. Some teams play looser, some teams play tighter, and both outcomes make sense. Senior day adds emotion, and emotion can speed you up, or it can make you press. Pressed shots look fine in the air, then they hit the front rim and ruin your math. Firestone's small gym feel also matters for rhythm. Tight spaces can speed decisions, and speed isn't always your friend. A couple of misses can turn into hurried possessions, and hurried possessions turn into empty trips. Empty trips are the silent killer when everyone expects points. Availability can nudge efficiency too, even without dramatic headlines. Ugbo being ruled out for Washington State is already baked into how they've been operating lately. Dozick sitting questionable for Pepperdine is the kind of note that can shave scoring if minutes get rearranged. Rotation continuity sounds like coach talk, but it shows up fast on the scoreboard. The cleanest way to think about this total is how much has to go right for it to sail. You need shots to fall early, you need the pace to stay honest, and you need the cold spells to stay short. With mid-tempo leanings and recent volatility, that's a lot to ask from one night. The more realistic script includes at least one stretch where the ball doesn't go in, and that stretch is usually enough. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Gonzaga versus St. Mary's. Gonzaga Bulldogs at St. Mary's Gales on Saturday, February 28, 2026 in Moraga, and it feels more like a season finale than just another regular season game. Gonzaga walks in with a record that looks like a video game, somewhere around 28-2 overall and 16-1 in league play, carrying that familiar mix of high ranking, strong efficiency on both ends, and the quiet pressure of likely saying goodbye to the West Coast Conference before moving on to a new conference home. St. Mary's answers with its own powerhouse season, roughly 26-4 and 15-2, built on that classic Gales identity that everyone in college hoops knows by now: slow pace, hard contests, bodies on the glass, and a defense that makes every possession feel like you are taking an exam you did not study for. The first meeting in Spokane told you a lot about how thin the margin is here. St. Mary's dragged Gonzaga right into the grinder, kept the tempo in their comfort zone, and even walked into halftime with the scoreboard tilted their way. Then Gonzaga did the thing good teams do. They adjusted, protected the ball, trimmed the mistakes to almost nothing after the break, and slowly stretched the game until it ended in that 73-65 kind of score that looks tidy but felt tense all the way through. If you watched it, you could almost feel both teams thinking, "We know exactly what you want to do," and still trying to force their own script onto the night. Here is the thing that keeps pulling this matchup toward one side of the spread. Gonzaga brings the greater scoring ceiling, the deeper pool of shot creators, and a long history of turning these banner-on-the-line games into statements, even when the setting is hostile and the crowd is practically breathing on the floor. St. Mary's is excellent at what it does, no one questions that, but its path to covering here feels narrower. They have to control tempo, own the glass, live at the free throw line, and keep this within a couple of possessions for most of the game. Gonzaga, on the other hand, can cover by doing what it already does well, stacking efficient half-court possessions, sprinkling in those little mini runs, and trusting that its combination of offense and defense eventually stretches the gap once or twice. In a rivalry where both teams know the other inside out, the side that can win in more ways, run with pace or grind in the half-court, usually ends up rewarding its backers against the spread. As our first pick for this matchup, the Gonzaga Bulldogs to cover the spread as favorites is our full-game side pick. On paper, both Gonzaga and St. Mary's guard at a high level, holding opponents to modest totals per night, and if you only glance at the defensive stats, your brain starts whispering low scoring, slow game, careful with the total. Then you remember that Gonzaga regularly pushes games into higher scoring ranges anyway, with its offense living around the mid-80s in points, while St. Mary's has quietly built an attack that sits comfortably in the high 70s, even while playing at a more methodical pace. So the raw averages paint a split picture. The defenses tug the expected number downward, the offenses pull it back up, and the projected total ends up feeling caught in the middle. The style clash adds another layer to how many points this can realistically produce. St. Mary's wants long possessions, strong rebounding, and trips to the line, which might sound friendly to a lower total, but efficient free throw shooting and extra possessions off the glass actually help nudge scores upward, especially in tight games. Gonzaga is comfortable playing faster stretches inside a slower game, running off misses, attacking early, and turning just a few empty Gales possessions into quick bursts of scoring. You get this interesting combination, a game that looks slow on the surface but has built-in scoring boosters, clean shooting, smart offense, and both teams capable of staying out of long droughts. Rivalry games like this one also tend to get weird late. If the score is close, you can see the classic sequence: intentional fouls, quick scoring attempts, timeouts that stretch the final minute into a whole separate episode. Those late possessions often push games past where they spent most of the night, especially when one side, like St. Mary's, is money from the stripe and the other, like Gonzaga, is comfortable playing with a lead but still aggressive enough to attack the rim. Add in the possibility of extra time, which always lurks in evenly matched games, and the projected total starts to feel a bit more fragile than the raw defensive numbers suggest. Honestly, the first meeting staying below a higher score has a way of fooling people. That game featured a sloppy Gonzaga first half, a St. Mary's tempo win for long stretches, and still the offenses found their rhythm once turnovers settled down. If both teams bring sharper execution from the opening tip in this rematch, with the emotional boost of what might be Gonzaga's last conference road stop in Moraga and all the history tied into that, it becomes much easier to see both offenses climbing into healthy scoring territory. That is especially true when you factor in how cleanly St. Mary's converts free throws and how often Gonzaga can force defenses into rotation, creating good looks instead of forcing hero shots. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.